Welcome to the Engage My City podcast, a podcast that dares to answer honest questions through raw and thought-provoking conversations. It's a podcast where we say, you were thinking it, but we said it. We're your hosts, Mike Drury
and Tiffany Gardner,
and we are so excited to have you join us today.
In each episode, we'll dive into roundtable discussions with some of our staff and elders at Pine Hills Church. Together, we'll explore topics like unique calling, spiritual gifts, revival in the church, and much more. Our goal is to shed light on the questions we often hesitate to ask and to provide thoughtful insights that can empower us to surrender to the Holy Spirit's transformative work in our lives. Before we begin, let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. I'm Tiffany Gardner, the Engage Director at Pine Hills Church, where we are committed to the mission of bringing people to Jesus, building people to live like Jesus, and sending people to multiply like Jesus. Our focus in this season is on our month-long serving initiative in August, where we practice our mission of Bring, Build, Send by engaging our city through relational volunteer opportunities. This podcast is here to be an extension of our mission and inspire us to have more meaningful conversations around the difficult questions or barriers we may come against as we engage. With me is our co-host, Pastor Mike Drury. Mike, for those who might not know who you are, how long have you been pastoring Pine Hills Church, and what is something you feel passionate about when you think about our city?
Thanks, Tiff. It's great to be on the first ever Engage My City podcast. So I've been a Fort Waynian now for 17 years.
Is that what they're called, by the way?
That's what I'm calling them right now. So maybe I've tabbed a new term.
Yeah, I love it.
So 17 years, over a decade and a half. And as we were literally just talking before we started airing, I love this city. I love the city God's called me to. And one of the things when I think about passionate Fort Wayne is the word that came to my mind was growth. Over 17 years to see where we're at now from when I first moved here and watch the growth that's happened all over the city. It's not just localized in one small portion. It seems to be all over, certainly downtown and the things that are happening, but all over the place. And I think one of the reasons that inspires me or I'm passionate about is because that growth of the city turns into growth opportunities for us as a church in a whole host of ways to minister to the greater Fort Wayne area. And so that's really excites me. And I think, man, as we say around here often, the best is yet to come. Yeah. Well, today joining us, we also have Justin Sommer, our adult ministries pastor, and Hugo Reyes, or shall I say Hugo Reyes, our Spanish ministries pastor. Thank you both for being willing to jump in on our first ever Engage My City podcast episode. So, in a podcast that's all about questions, it seems fitting to me to start with a question. So, Justin, Hugo, when you think about our city, what comes to mind as something that inspires you?
You want to go first?
Sure. So, thanks for having us here. For me, knowing that it's only about 2 years since I moved to Fort Wayne, I have grown to like and enjoy being in the Midwest. I never envisioned myself here in the Midwest, but I have learned to like the change of seasons. I've learned to like the pace of the city, something that inspires me, and definitely I enjoy, I know God called me to be here, and I have found community, I have found opportunities and purpose, and it inspires me. The community of Fort Wayne, the openness that they have, the people that I found, the diversity that we have too, and what I have learned about people and connecting with them, I can say that I love to be here.
Excellent. I've been born and raised here in Fort Wayne, so I haven't left yet, and no one's kicked me out at least. So yeah, I've seen it for many years. So I would agree with you, Mike. Part of it is just the investment that we were making locally in our community, in different areas, just to see people enjoy being here, enjoy the city. But I think one of the things I like about Fort Wayne is you kind of get, it's not too small, it's not too big. So you get some feel of big city things, but you also get small town feels. And the longer you're here, the more people you know. And so it's just easy to see people in different places and different parts of town that you know from some sphere of life or experience, whatever. So it's just, I think that was some of the things that I really like about Fort Wayne.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. We're excited to dive into our topic today. It's a good one. It's the topic of who are we not talking to Jesus about? So how about we start things off with the question of who do we tend to avoid? which I know that's such a broad, and it's also making an assumption that we do avoid people, which I would say
is accurate.
Is accurate.
It's accurate.
Correct.
Yes.
We all
Come
know
on.
there are people that we avoid. We may not want to acknowledge that, but there are people or situations, things that we avoid. So who do we tend to avoid, or maybe who are we tempted to avoid, but can't always avoid them?
I think in our human nature, we tend to associate with what's similar and comfortable to us. So we tend to hang out with people that look similar to us, have the same interest, and whatever is discomfortable, our initial reaction is to avoid that. So naturally, anything that looks different, anything that challenge our worldview, anything that doesn't fit with what we're used to, I think our natural response is to avoid the discomfort of the differences.
Yeah, I agree. We're creatures of comfort. So if it's not comfortable, if it's going to be messy or costly or challenging in any way, it's just easier to avoid those people or those situations because I like ease, I like comfort, I like knowing what's expected, and so it just makes sense to avoid all those things, and just kind of coast through life in comfort, I guess. I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think that it's the element of the unknown many times, right? Like we don't know, so it's the unknown usually brings fear too. So it's like when we see people that look different, and that unknown element of like we don't know how exactly, we don't understand their culture, we don't understand the way they do things, the way they think, that brings that initial natural fear, and then the reaction is like, I'm just gonna avoid this and stay with what's comfort.
Yeah, I was literally thinking that as you were talking about, for me, it's if I don't know how to respond or how to respond to someone, I tend to just avoid it. So a very tangible example was for the longest time, when you're sitting at a light and you see a homeless person begging or asking for money, they're holding a sign, what's the temptation can be to just ignore, right? Like you're just like, oh, pretend you're busy with your car, turn up your music, just try to like, don't make eye contact. Because if you make eye contact, then they know that you've seen them and you feel like you need to respond. So the initial reaction is avoid, until I learned more about how you can actually interact. Like, what does that look like to build relationships with people, to have a conversation that, like, instead of avoiding and to not, make any eye contact, like, how do I actually enter into that space, right? That is tempting to avoid because it's uncomfortable, or I don't know how they're going to respond, or I don't know how they're going to react, or I don't know how to respond, or I don't know how to interact in that situation. But I think that's where knowledge comes into play, right? Like learning more about people, being willing to step into those relationships of building relationships with people, especially people that are different than you or that you wouldn't maybe normally be apt to seek out. But yeah, I think you're definitely onto something with that unknown element of it.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about knowledge and awareness too, like growing in our awareness, right, of the biases that we have.
Yeah.
And understanding where's that fear coming from, and accepting that it's natural. I think we don't have to feel guilty about that either. It's a natural response. But I think now, you mentioned it, it's like the growth, like, right, how do I grow in that awareness of my surroundings and the people, and even acknowledging that naturally I'm avoiding people and recognizing that that's part of my natural response. But now what do I do next, right?
Throughout the month of August, we invite you to join the conversation. Share your thoughts and favorite experiences by using the hashtag EngageMyCity on social media. Whether it's a story from the area you served in or a follow-up question to our podcast discussion, we can't wait to hear from you.
Can we just, again, this is for me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well too, and I think Hugo, maybe you just spoke to it briefly, but again, I want to come back to it. Like, we avoid people we don't like. Yeah. And I just think about like people that have philosophical different, you said worldview differences, people that have political differences. I mean, that's why we're so polarized in this country. Like, you don't share my political viewpoints, I don't like you. Like, I have no desire to even spend time with you. People that have religious differences, and even lifestyle differences. I mean, I'm just being real. Like, let's just be honest. And you're listening right now. You know this is true. Like, just think about this. There are people who could probably go in any one of those categories and say, I avoid them, or I literally don't like them because they practice this, or I don't like them because they believe this, or because they voted for this. I mean, it's just, I think there's, yes, it's comfortability with people like us, but I think sometimes too, let's just be honest, it's just our flesh too. In our flesh, we avoid people that we don't like, and there are people that we don't like. And I mean, that just has to be broken down by the Spirit, because as we're going to talk about, I mean, that bleeds into our desire or willingness to engage with people and to go to the next level, not just engage, but to actually serve them, and especially serving people that we don't like.
Yeah, it's good.
It grates against the flesh, I guess, is sort of what I'm trying to say. I was convicted, I think maybe a year or two ago. We had a speaker here. I can't remember who it was, but they asked the question. They said, when was the last time you had somebody at your dinner table that didn't look like you? And I was so convicted, because I answered the question in my mind like, I can't remember the last time. Everybody that comes to my house and eats at my house looks exactly like me. They have the same skin color. They're basically from the same socioeconomic background. So big conviction moment there. And I think this is an important place for us to start, because it requires us breaking down some barriers to get to the point of having the heart of Jesus to serve. Well, with that being said, so let me just follow up with this question. What relationships do we avoid that when we look at scriptures, we see that Jesus would enter into?
I think it's some of the same answers. It's just more. So I'm reminded of, they accuse Jesus, or at least according to his words, of being a glutton and a drunkard. And so as to why, we don't have all of the details necessarily as to, obviously he wasn't a glutton or a drunkard because he was sinless, but he was hanging out with people that maybe that was part of their lifestyle. And so people that they were, deemed sinners, or, which is an interesting term in scripture, that's the category that they're in, they're sinners or tax collectors or prostitutes or whatever. These people that weren't accepted, or that you didn't hang out with in religious circles. So you avoided these people. They were marginalized, the people that no one was going to. And yet we see Jesus, who said, he actually came to seek and to save the lost. He's like, I'm going after those people. I'm hanging out with those people. I'm going into their homes. I'm having meals with Zacchaeus and his tax collector friends, and we're having a banquet, and the religious people are going crazy. Like, what are you doing? And that's just, he was okay with being associated with those people. He didn't have to embrace their lifestyle or do the things that they did necessarily. But it just seems, I always find it fascinating that Jesus, the religious people didn't like him, but the people that were marginalized or didn't have the worldview or the religious beliefs that he had, that they were so comfortable around him, that he could hang out with them, that they would invite him into his home. And it just always makes me wonder, like, man, what was it about Jesus that these people were just so comfortable with him being around? They'd invite him into their homes, they'd spend time with him, they confessed to him, and they'd eventually, some of them would follow him, It's kind of incredible to think about. But yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, when you mentioned that, like, a lot of things come to my mind. The fact that you mentioned that he will sit at a table with the outcast, and that's something that's very intimate, like sharing a meal with someone, having them over to your house, going to their house, sharing, like, just this sitting at the table. And Jesus exemplifies that radical love. Those relationships, like, Jesus actually was pursuing that. And having that intimacy with them, building those bridges. And I think that's something that's very challenging for us today, and also inspiring how he bridged that. And he went to, like, you see, like, he didn't look at the racial difference. Like, when he sat down with Samaritans, he reached out to the lepers, to the outcasts, to people that were marginalized from society. And that's something that, wow, it's very challenging for us.
Yeah. I think, like, one verse that I would hear consistently, almost as an excuse or a reference point to maybe not engage as much, was always the verse, like, be in the world, but not of it. And so oftentimes that was used as, like, well, we don't want to, be around people like that. Or it was almost like we were afraid a little bit of whatever actions or behaviors that they were displaying would automatically, like, which there is something to be said of, like, if you're like, who you're around does influence you for sure, like, primary. So that when we talk about community, like, you need to have community also that is, similar, like the beliefs of you, they're following Jesus, they're encouraging you in that. But at the same time, like, I think sometimes we use that verse as almost a bubble that protects us from like, well, I don't want to hang around people that think differently or that behave differently, because what if that's going to start, I'm going to start doing that, like almost like it's infectious or something. And so I think, yeah, that's just such a challenge of like, but no, then that means you're not having them at your table. You're not inviting them into your home. And talk about the concept of love, like how sometimes love turns into a theory, but what does that look like practically to love someone? So like, can you love and avoid someone simultaneously? Like, can you love someone actually from a distance, or does it need to be up close?
All month long, we're asking the question, will you engage? For those who are new to us, Engage My City is a local outreach initiative to relationally serve our city in tangible ways. Every year during the month of August, Pine Hills Church focuses on various areas of impact within our city as we partner with local organizations through volunteer opportunities. Do you want to sign up for an upcoming project? Visit our website at pinehills.church/EMC.
So let's follow up on that then. Can you love and avoid someone at the same time? Can you love and avoid someone simultaneously? Or maybe put it another way, can you love someone from a distance?
At first, it sounds kind of like contradictory, right? Like saying, like, can you like love and avoid someone at the same time? Because when we think about practical and action love, it requires engagement, right? It requires empathy. It requires understanding. And how do you do that from a distance? So I think to our point in the question, in our minds, it comes like there has to be relationship. There has to be engagement if we actually want to show practical love. Now, I understand there's multiple situations, right? There's when you have to put boundaries, like there's all different sort of context. But we're talking about here, if it's the barrier of like the discomfort, I just don't want to be uncomfortable. And that's what I am avoiding and keeping it from a distance. Then it's kind of contradictory to say like I can do it just from here, from my comfort zone, and not stepping into it, doing something that's practical. I think the Bible challenges us in a very practical way. When we read James come to my mind, the book of James, and then how practical he is in like you have to show it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, technically you can, I think, but I don't think that's the norm. And I don't think that the thrust of love, it demands relationship, it demands proximity, it demands being close in some regards. And my mind goes to John 3:16 right away. For God so loved the world, how do we know? He gave Jesus. He literally came to us. He didn't stay at a distance. He came right to us, put on flesh and bone. I mean, you don't get any closer than that. So I think he demonstrates his love for us in that. He shows us that love in its purest, best form happens in proximity, happens in the context of relationship.
Well, so to build off of that, I want to apply the question to the Great Commandment. Right? So think about that. Can we love and avoid someone simultaneously? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength or body. Can we actually do that from a distance? And I think the inherent answer is no. No, we can't. And then secondly, love your neighbor. Like, does that mean just have good thoughts? I'm never going to talk to them. I'm never going to check in on them. I'm not looking for ways to serve them. But in my house, I'm thinking good thoughts towards my neighbor. Of course not. And here's the deal. Love finds its fullness in expression. While there is a feeling or an emotional aspect, at the end of the day, that's not the fullness of love. Love is always meant to be expressed. It's not meant to just be felt or thought or said. I think like the fullness of love finds itself in that expression. And God so loved the world that he gave his son. Like he manifested his love in the expression of Christ and what he did for us, and then through him inviting us into that relationship with him. So when I put that in context, no, you can't genuinely love someone. You can't genuinely seek to build relationship with someone, to get to know them, to care. from a distance. It has to find itself in real relational equity, which requires effort and energy. So, like with that, if loving others then has to be done up close, and we're talking about loving others and serving people and serving our city, because that's what Engage My City is all about, right?
Yep.
Does serving have to happen in the context of a relationship? Could be a trick question, or could be pretty simple.
Yeah.
Tiff, what do you think?
I think there's an assumption in there too that love and service, like there's a connection there too, right? Because I think sometimes you can serve without the right motivation, right? So when we're talking about loving others and how I think that should be the motivation that then influences or motivates us to serve, where sometimes we flip that and we think, okay, I'm supposed to serve others, so therefore I'll do that, but it's not really with that motivation of love. And so I think for true service, like if we're defining what serving others, the way that the Lord calls us to serve others, like I think you have to be up close, because to your point, to love people, you have to be up close. And I think to serve others in the way that God has called us to serve requires love, and love requires proximity. So I think it does have to happen close, which to get close to someone, you have to build that relationship, right? Like you're not just going to enter into someone's life and try to start serving them up close where they're like, we don't know who you are. Why are you doing this? Like, what's going on? And
they won't receive that as love.
Right.
Usually.
It'll be a little invasive. So, but I think we even see that, right? In some of the different projects or things that we've done in the past with Engage My City, like people ask the question, why, right? Like, why are you doing this for me? Like, why would you, take time to serve me in this way? And so it's a great opportunity to say, because I want to build that relationship with you, right? Like I want to get to know who you are. I don't want to, this isn't just a task for me to check off a box, but if I'm serving you in a loving way, which is what I'm called to do, in order to love you, I want to also know who you are. Like I want to build that relationship with you. So yeah, I think true service in a way that shows love, I think absolutely happens within the context of a relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they go hand in hand. I mean, love in its purest form is sacrificial. There's a cost to it. And so part of serving someone else is paying a cost of, I'm going to put your needs above my own, and I'm going to love you whatever the cost is, It's 1 John 3:16 talks about this. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. So just as he laid down his life, that's serving us in its best form. There's a cost that comes with that. He says we're also supposed to do that for others as well. They're supposed to lay down our lives through whatever those means are. Serving is certainly part of that, but there's a cost to that. And so, yeah, love in its purest form is sacrificial. There is a cost, and so I think you have to serve people in that way as part of loving them.
And I think Jesus said that example of loving and serving others in that context of relationship. And that should be our model to follow. Because I think of cases where, sure, you can serve and not love at the same time. Or you can serve without the context of a relationship. Like you can volunteer your hours and do tasks and avoid the relationship and kind of like feel good with yourself of like, well, I gave this. And for sure you are giving something, right? You're giving your time, you're serving, you're volunteering. But I think the challenge when we see the example of Jesus is like, he took it farther. He was like, I see the person, I relate, I connect, that human connection. And I think sometimes in volunteering and serving, it's easy to lose track of that. It's easy to jump into, this is the task, this is the project. And sure, you're fulfilling a specific tangible need, which is great. But Jesus showed the example of like, he connected with the person. Like he fulfilled needs. Yes, he fed people that were hungry, he healed people that were sick, but he had that human connection. Like, I see you, I know your name, I call you by your name. Like that requires a step further. And I think for us and for our team and what we're promoting, the challenge for this year is like, take that step to like go serve, but love at the same time, and like connect, have that relationship.
Yeah, that's good. Even as you were talking, I think of an example when we think of Jesus serving others. I think of Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Like that was him showing love. That was an act of service. But what did he choose to do? He chose to do something that was so personal and intimate and really humble for him to choose. I mean, he could have served his disciples and shown service to his disciples in many different ways, but he chose something that was super personal for them, and that communicated that love, that if you didn't care about a person, you're not going to wash their feet. Like that's lowly. That's not something that, you would naturally be drawn to, but he showed that as an act of service and love to them, which I think is great. So let's take it maybe a step even more practical. So we've kind of been talking up theoretically, what does it look like to serve and love, but how do we take steps to enter into relationships with those that we naturally want to avoid?
I'll take a stab at it to get us going, right? So 3 things came to my mind. Number 1, because, and this ties back into where we started, I think it starts for many of us with confession. And that's confessing that, God, you have to break down some barriers in my heart. And so, I if I may, quick personal story, as we've contemplated this first episode and its content, to your point, I tend to avoid people that are of the people that might be in the homeless category or wanderers, drifters, and I realized that it actually stems from something. It's not random. I was on staff at a church many years ago, and we were in a highly traveled area of a lot of either homeless or jobless or drifting people, and they would always stop in the church and ask for money. And there was this one lady one time, and she came in, and I mean, she just had the sob story, and it just wrecked my heart. And the church didn't give out money, but I gave her money and things like that and whatever. A month later, she was back again, and she had gone to somebody else, a different staff member at the church, and it told a total different story. And then I come around the corner, and he was introducing me to her, and I was like, wait, you were here a month ago, and you just told me a totally different story, and I gave you that money. And I think there's just, in the flesh, such a grind of like, man, you raked me over the coals. You're just playing me like a secondhand fiddle kind of a thing. And so I think it really developed this and seeing that on a regular basis, that my initial response is, you're fake. You're just trying to scam. You're just trying to make money. And I know that's not true for a large majority. Maybe that's true for some, but that's fed into some of my initial resistance to avoid people and serving like that I think God is breaking down those barriers. So I believe it begins with a confession of that, like, God, show me who I intentionally avoid, and I want to confess that and ask you to remove that barrier. So confession, then investigation, which means me and for us to begin to pray for opportunities to enter into these relationships that we're talking about. So I'm not doing random. I'm literally investigating through prayerful consideration. Obviously, Engage My City goes a long way to opening up doors for people to naturally step into that. But when you talk about above and beyond just our month-long emphasis, but a year-round pursuit of this. So confession, then investigation, and then initiation. Then I more than likely will have to initiate into that relationship and into that serving component. So those are 3 things that came to my mind quick, at least how to take steps: confessing where I need to confess, then investigation through prayerful consideration and opportunities, and then initiating and being willing to get uncomfortable to do that.
I think those are awesome steps that you're mentioning, and it makes me think on the prayer aspect of it. I think there's a huge component when we pray, and we become vulnerable before the Lord, and we acknowledge and we confess, and then we ask the Lord to show us, and that we can grow in an awareness of like, what's the Lord allowing in our context right now, where we are, in the circles that we're related to. Like in that prayer of, Lord, open my eyes. Who are you allowing me to be in contact with? Who are you allowing me to see on the street, in the neighborhood where I am? Like, please, Lord, show me. And I think that's the key part. If we follow the leading of the Spirit, that's when we're going to see fruit, and he will have a purpose with that, and protection, and just, I think that prayer time, sometimes we miss a lot in that area of like praying, Lord, what opportunities you're showing me, and like allow me to listen and follow your direction.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think I agree with all that's been said, so I don't need to add to that. But I think part of it is sometimes it may be that we need to go somewhere completely different, or to people that we have never interacted with. That could be part of it if the Lord is stirring in that way. For some, it's just being aware to the context you're already in. I mean, it could be literally someone that lives across the street that I avoid for whatever reason. That maybe that's where I need to start. Is just I don't have to go across town. I can go across the street to that person that drives me nuts for whatever reason. So it could be something as simple as that, or someone at work, or it could be a family member. I mean, it could be something that's already in my immediate context. I don't have to go create a brand new relationship or go somewhere else. It could be there, but it could also be somewhere else. And I think it's important to just to be reflective and prayerful, as already been mentioned, because we can't all serve everybody, but we can all serve somebody. And I think for whatever reason, we all have different stories, backgrounds, that we may be drawn to a certain demographic or a certain situation or whatever. And maybe for us, that's who the Lord wants us to serve and get uncomfortable with and demonstrate this costly love. And it may not be the same. I mean, the people that I should love may be different than the people Hugo should love, maybe different than the people that Tiffany should love, and vice versa. And that's okay. We don't all need to love everybody the same. We just need to love the people that the Lord is leading us to love, the people that are in our immediate context. And I think if we all do that as being led by the Spirit, I think, the Lord knows what he's doing, and he'll make sure that we cover the ground that we need to cover and love the people that we need to love. So,
yeah, I love that. I think too, like exploring those things, those maybe people groups or whatever that make us uncomfortable, or that when we talk about wanting to avoid, like I think leaning into that a little bit more, right? Like praying through that of like, maybe that is an area of growth or something to actually step into and start building those bridges and start forming those relationships of, if I'm feeling so uncomfortable about a people group or whatever, or a person, that I'm avoiding it, like let's press into the whole, like with the Holy Spirit into that of like, why. I love when you were talking, Pastor Mike, of just where was the root of that, right? Like tracing that back to where these things are rooted, so that it's not just a behavioral change, but it's the Holy Spirit transforming us to actually change our thinking, our mind. He's renewing our mind in that, our thoughts, opinions about people, belief systems that we have about people, like allowing that transformative work to then the love flows out of it, and we can actually serve and we can actually build those relationships. And it's not just out of guilt or, out of any other misconceived reason, but we're actually doing that then out of love, because we've found what that root is and allow the Holy Spirit to transform.
That's good.
So.
Yeah.
Some good conversation today. This has been, super impactful and super exciting as we think about engaging our city, just how we can allow the Spirit to continue to transform us, right, internally, so that we're serving with that love and motivation in how we interact with others. But before we wrap up today's episode, though, we want to give you a sneak peek of what's coming up this season on the Engage My City podcast.
Let's talk about what we mean by deconstruction first of all. So what is healthy versus what is dangerous when you think about deconstruction?
Well, I think it's important too to like put out there. Deconstruction is also class, like a lot of people our age, my age, I guess, is like that 20 to 28, 30, whatever range that's where they get lumped in. That's where deconstruction is happening. I would argue and say that that's not the only place deconstruction is happening. And I would think if you're doing what healthy deconstruction is, it's actually everybody's deconstructing, even from a young age. And Paige and I were talking about this a little bit earlier too, is like the questions that we're asking, the questions that we have freedom to ask as kids come up through youth ministry or just in life. They're seeking answers for something. So they're deconstructing whatever preconceived notions they may have and trying to seek out their own truths and what that means for their lives.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Engage My City podcast. Remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes throughout the month of August. Until next time, keep asking honest questions and stay engaged.
This podcast is brought to you by Pine Hills Church. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for event reminders and more inspiring content. To learn about our church, the Engage My City initiative, and how you can get connected, visit our website at pinehills.church/engage.